How do we come to grips with the 2016 election? Arguably one of the biggest electoral college-driven upsets in political history, and the first U.S. election likely to have fallen victim to foreign intervention. It's something millions of Americans have been asking, even months after the shock of Election Day. Now, we're hearing from the woman at the heart of it all, Hillary Rodham Clinton. She's out with a new book titled simply, What Happened? On Thursday, I spoke with Secretary Clinton, not just about what happened, but about what we do now. Take a listen. Secretary Clinton, Hillary Rodham Clinton, and by the way, all my girlfriends love that you got that Rodham right in there prominently. Thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Joy. It's really exciting to be here talking to you about this.
Thank you. Well, so I want to first of all congratulate you on the book. It is surprising, I think, in a lot of ways, because it's very personal. It's actually very emotional in points. It's very wonky. Was it cathartic to write it, or was it excruciating?
It was both. It started out excruciating, and as I write in the book, it was really painful, coming off of a surprising, devastating loss to Donald Trump. So I really had to work at it every day, and sometimes I would work on part of a chapter or read research that I was compiling to make sure I was giving the accurate information, and I'd have to go lie down. It was so hard. Finally getting through it, it turned out to be cathartic. And I'm finding as I travel around the country, and I'll be across America, it's cathartic for a lot of people, which I feel really good about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing you hear most often from people who voted for you is that this is the hardest thing that they've experienced. And even people who didn't vote and maybe then later wish they did. Has this been worse for you, the Trump era, than you expected it to be?
It has been. I really had such deep doubts about his preparation, his temperament, his character, his experience. But he's been even worse than I thought he would be. I thought, and I tried in my concession speech to make clear, that we should all give him the space to be the president for every American. That's what we want from our presidents. Regardless of our partisan differences, we want to feel like the person in the Oval Office really cares about and is looking after everybody. And that just hasn't turned out to be the case, starting with the inauguration, which is how I opened the book, talking about how excruciating it was to go. Yeah. And what a missed opportunity for him, because all he did was really reinforce the dark, divisive image of America that he'd been feeding to his supporters.
Yeah. Throughout the book, one of the threads that runs through, there are a lot of threads that run through, but one of them is about sexism and misogyny. I feel like in the 2008 election, we sort of litigated the question of race, whether or not we could be post-racial. Have we as a country dealt with the question of whether sexism and misogyny is prominent in this society?
No, we haven't. Obviously, we've made progress. My life has seen so much progress on behalf of knocking down institutional barriers and laws and other obstacles to women's progress. But I devote a whole chapter to what I call endemic sexism and misogyny, because it's very clear we have a lot of work to do. And it's not only in politics, it's obviously in business and the media and every other part of our society. But I think elevating it and making it visible and forcing a conversation about it is absolutely essential. And I tried to be as candid as I could, not only about what happened to me that I lived through, but what I see happening to women in politics, women who might someday run for president, women who are, struggling to be taken seriously in Silicon Valley or wherever. We see these horrible efforts to turn the clock back on women.
Yeah. When you heard or watched on television and heard people, those guttural chants of lock her up, when you saw some of the truly awful things that people were wearing on their bodies, I can remember being in Cleveland and seeing women putting buttons and T-shirts on that use the B word, the C word, about you. When you saw that, how did that make you feel?
Well, it was deeply troubling on several levels, and I try to unpack this because, first of all, it's not pleasant to be called names and to be subjected to the kind of insults that come across the online media all the time, which we see when women express an opinion. So on a personal level, it was both distressing, but also somewhat problematic, because it's one thing for people individually to express those views, but for a candidate running for president of the United States to give permission to those views being put out into the public arena, in fact, to encourage it and carry it on, to make it a centerpiece of his convention, which should be a time of incredible excitement to have somebody nominated for president, and instead was dystopian and negative and very pointed against me. The second level is when I see women, and look, it's predominantly white women. Let's just be clear about that. I won women. I lost white women, although I got more white women's votes than President Obama did in 2012. So this is an ongoing challenge. But when I see women doing that, I think, why are they publicly disrespecting themselves? Why are they opening the door to have someone say that about them in their workplace, in a community setting? Do they not see the connection there? And I think that's one of the problems with sexism. We had such a public and still an ongoing movement to expand civil rights. And again, I'm proud of the progress, but we still have a lot of problems we have to confront, because electing Barack Obama did not end racism, as we know all too well. But it gave the country a chance to say, hey, wait a minute, we are better than this. With sexism, it is still not viewed as the serious threat it is to women's aspirations, to the ability of young girls to imagine themselves doing all kinds of things. So I'm happy to have people disagree with me, say, you know what, I don't agree with her on health or the economy or immigration, whatever they want to disagree with me about. But when they resort to sexism, that says, number one, they don't really know what their own arguments are. And number two, they are opening that door even wider for sexism and misogyny to be used against them and people they love, their daughters, their nieces, their sisters.
Yeah, one of the, you talk in the book a lot about, you write about Keene, New Hampshire, and those early days in Iowa. You were on this listening tour. I was actually on that tour as part of the media sort of pack that were following you around. And I can remember talking to particularly young white women who, surprisingly enough, were more likely than young white men in those two states to say, it doesn't matter to me having a woman president. That's not something I prioritize. What is that about?
Well, I think it's about, and I try to unpack it also in the book, I think it's about the stage that a young woman finds herself at any particular point in time. Actually, the research is pretty clear. If you're a young, college-educated woman and you are starting off in the workforce, you are pretty much at wage parity with your counterpart, a young male college graduate. By the end of your 20s, you no longer are. Once you decide, if you do, to be married, to have a family, you fall even further behind. You don't yet understand all of the sort of invisible signals and attitudes that are at work that can hold you back. That's why I've been really proud of young women in Silicon Valley speaking up. You know, they didn't sign on for sexual harassment and assault. They didn't sign on for being dismissed and demeaned. They've got the education, they've got the drive and the ambition, a word that should be good for girls as well as boys. But all of a sudden, they're speaking out and saying, you know, this is a hostile workplace. We're not going to put up with it. But if you haven't yet experienced that, and that certainly was, you know, my observation as I would speak with and hear reports about many young women who thought, okay, we're beyond that. You know, look, I mean, you know, I'm doing fine. And it's only through more experience, and this is not to be a downer, this is just to describe the reality that faces women as you go through the workforce, and the kind of you know, hidden views about women's place that begin to affect you personally.
So you do talk a lot about race in the book and the things that you learned along the way, the people the white working class voters who were with you in 2008, who were suddenly screaming at you in West Virginia and Kentucky. Right. During the campaign, you talked very bluntly about race. When you were at the Schomburg Center, when you were at National Action Network, you said some things about white privilege, about Black Lives Matter, about police violence and its racial component that really had not typically been said in a campaign. Do you believe, looking back now, that forthrightness on race is what cost you those white working class voters?
I think it was a combination of a lot of factors, but that was certainly part of the equation. I thought it was imperative to speak out because, I come from a long tradition of standing up against racism, sexism, trying to expand the circle of opportunity for everybody. And there were things going on in the country that were disturbing to me. And I also was struck by the research, which I mention in the book, that we had this very successful two-term Black American president. And I was honored to serve him. I was proud of the job he did. But starting in 2012, scholars who follow race attitudes began to see a backlash that was clearly, in part, a reaction to President Obama, someone who had conducted himself with such dignity, who had done an honorable and an excellent job. So I could see that there was beginning to be a turning. And I was very disturbed by that. And I thought, we need to bring it up. Don't pretend you can hide it under the rug or in the corner. But it was something that most likely I paid a political price for. But as I write in the book about the mothers of the movement, women I came to know who had lost children to gun violence, either by gangs or random shooting or police actions, I was so in awe of their strength and their dignity and their faith. I wanted the rest of the country to sort of see that. Mm-hmm. You can't identify with what you don't know and you never see. So I wanted people, maybe through my campaign, which is why I did so much with Mothers of the Movement, why they traveled with me, spoke on my behalf, for moms out there, and dads too, to say, yeah, how would I feel? We have to create more empathy and understanding. Again, I don't think it's a job that is ever finished, but as we saw in Charlottesville, race is a huge negative force that motivates these white supremacists and neo-Nazis and Ku Klux Klanners.
Well, you brought up neo-Nazi, so I have to bring up Charlottesville. Donald Trump's response to it has created a lot of blunt talk about his views on race. You've known Donald Trump a little bit. You know his history regarding the Central Park Five, his history regarding housing discrimination in New York. In your view, this has been said about him, is Donald Trump a white supremacist?
Well, I certainly think there's a lot of evidence as to how he has behaved historically during the campaign and as president, that he is appealing to those who are. Now, I can't look into his heart. I can't say what he really feels, because I think he is such a political opportunist that if he thought he could get votes and loyalty from a different direction, he would probably go there. But he started off from the very first day attacking Mexicans, calling them rapists. He had dog whistles that got increasingly louder on immigrants and Latinos and African Americans and women and Muslims and the whole panoply of scapegoats that he was holding out to his supporters as the explanation for whatever their grievance was. And so what I try to say in the book is, look, you need both economic justice and social justice. I was trying to argue for both. I think I had the best plans, the best ideas, the most workable ways of trying to lift incomes and provide a more inclusive economy and tax the wealthy to pay for a lot of the stuff that we needed, like infrastructure and so much more. But I'm not going to back off from social justice. It's one of the great accomplishments of our nation that, starting with, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, Title IX, the gay marriage decision, so much that has said to our fellow Americans, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, you're part of the American a wonderful experience, and you are welcome at the table. Come and contribute, make a difference. So I don't think he sees the world that way. I think he sees it in a very dark, divisive way, as we heard in his UN speech. It's us versus them, and his us is very much defined by his own experience and by what we can point to. And his us is also how he tried to motivate voters to be for him. And he didn't really repudiate David Duke. He didn't really repudiate a lot of the white supremacists who came out strongly for him. I called him out in a speech in Las Vegas in August of 2016 about the so-called alt-right, which was certainly very much grounded in white supremacy. So I think he has to be judged on his record.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Hillary Clinton will tell you what she thinks of Vladimir Putin and whether she would have fired Jim Comey. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.